Then we decided to have another one, and that was in June. And then we started to think about sort of various other challenges and how to sort of pin those down and things. And then we decided that it would be quite useful to open this up much more broadly and to have these conversations across the sector and across the globe, and also to sort of think about sort of different issues and to get sort of people with real expertise in to chat as well. So this is the first one of those. Is that a fair introduction, Karina, to all of this?
Yes, yeah, definitely. So the idea is that we're kind of facilitating this, but it's very much a kind of non-judgmental, safe space to share ideas, and we're recognizing that any one individual may not have the answers, but yeah, working together and sharing our top tips and our experiences is a kind of valuable way forward. Does that make sense?
So,
just on a practical note, I've just started recording this for, we'll put some of the beginning and the first speakers available if anyone wants to watch it afterwards. I'm assuming that's okay with everyone. If anyone's got a problem, let us know, and obviously kind of be mindful of what you say or do.
Cool. Okay, and so what the structure of this session is going to be is that we're going to hear from our speakers first of all, and that will be sort of about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a Q&A with them, and this is the second. Then we'll go off into smaller breakout groups to discuss some really specific questions and challenges that we've got in terms of engaging students online. And then we'll sort of come back and hopefully share tips, and hopefully go away after an hour and a half feeling ready to engage students much more online. Fingers crossed, that's the plan. So we'll hand over to our first speaker, if that's okay. That's all right. Oh, Karina's muted herself, so that's
that's okay.
Cool. So we'll hand over to our first speaker, who's Nicky Nielsen, and I can see that Joyce Tilsley is here as well, and I think Nicky is probably speaking sort of partly on behalf of Nicky and
Indeed,
Joyce.
Yes.
So I'm really lucky to have Nicky and Joyce as my colleagues at the University of Manchester, and they've been running an Egyptology distance learning program for a really long time. I think I will probably hear a bit more sort of background to that, and so I very much feel for them, because certainly at the University of Manchester Department of Ancient History and Archaeology and Egyptology, they are the go-to people when anyone has any kind of question about how we might engage students online. And as a result, I thought that they would be excellent to hear from today. So I'm going to hand over to Nicky now. Thanks, Nicky.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to try to share my screen and see if that works. So, can everyone see that? Does it work, Hannah?
It's worked.
Perfect. Brilliant. Okay. So I'm always worried that people aren't seeing anything. I'm just speaking into the void. So a little bit of background. I'm mainly just going to very briefly run through the sort of my background, where I'm coming from, and Joyce as well. And then some brief kind of tips and observations that we've made through the years, and show a couple of examples of some stuff that we're doing and trying to develop as well. So Egyptology at Manchester basically started as an evening class, which then evolved into an honest to God postal course, as in a distance learning course, with letters and packages of VHS tapes sent out every month, that sort of thing. And then in the sort of mid-2000s, it evolved into an online course and became an online course. So today it comprises 2 undergraduate programs, certificate and diploma, and an MA in Egyptology as well, and some non-accredited short courses, so CPD courses. We have about 120, 150 students spread across somewhere between 20 and 30 countries and most time zones. So as a result of that, we teach the Egyptology components wholly asynchronously. simply because of the nightmare it has been to try to organize live sessions. We have a teaching staff of 3, so Professor Joyce Tilsley, Dr. Hugh Twiston-Davies recently, and myself as well, covering mainly the history and archaeology of Pharaonic Egypt, but also Egyptian hieroglyphs. We also have a face-to-face unit, which, well, was taught face-to-face. Now it's going to be taught via blended learning next semester. So that's the kind of background that we have, and the course has been running now for about 15 years in its current incarnation. So to start with, I wanted to make some sort of general observations, because there is one thing that you get it a lot, I feel, from especially kind of university senior management, and they tend to use the term mirroring a lot, that distance learning courses should mirror face-to-face teaching. And it makes me incredibly cross, because it's kind of a silly word to use, because in my optic, at least, distance learning, some things can be done a lot better with distance learning, and some things work a lot better, some things don't work so much. But I think the danger starts when we think that distance learning has to be a complete copy of face-to-face learning, because that sort of just leads people to think, oh, well, if I just put some PDFs and maybe a pre-recorded lecture or 2 up online, then that's sort of it. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. So some of the things that I see as the biggest challenges that I come across a lot, especially now after this whole coronavirus thing, because I work a little bit more now with other people in the department and outside the department who are doing distance learning for the first time, well, I've put these down as sort of general observations that I think are pretty useful. First of all, the importance of audio. I think that sometimes loses out a little bit in favor of visuals, in favor of discussions about cameras and all this sort of stuff. I find that students are much more likely to forgive slightly fuzzy audio, whether slightly fuzzy visuals, whether it's live or pre-recorded, but they're not so likely to forgive it if you sound like you're talking to them from the bottom of a well, because it's much more difficult to actually understand what's being said. So getting a decent microphone is, whenever anyone asks me like a sort of good tip for distance learning, I usually tell them, do you have a good like USB microphone? If not, then get one. It doesn't have to cost a fortune, but they're really useful things. Anything that leans towards scripts or teleprompters. I know teleprompters have become really popular with some universities for distance learning. My issue with teleprompters is that using a teleprompter is a skill, and not everyone has been given the training to do it. So it can end up looking very stilted and quite unnatural in a sense. So in that sense, I would tend to avoid it as much as possible. Most importantly of all is to have a quite diverse attitude to really any kind of teaching delivery, but especially when you're thinking about including lectures. Lectures don't have to be the be-all and end-all of anything, neither face-to-face nor distance learning. But distance learning gives you a really good opportunity for kind of diversifying your methods of delivery, even when it's pre-recorded, like a lot of our stuff is asynchronous, using podcasts and interviews with guest speakers from around the world, using blogs, and kind of just making the actual basic delivery of the teaching a little bit more diverse and interesting. And finally, I think it's really important to emphasize to staff, especially staff that haven't got as much experience with distance learning, is sometimes simpler is better. I've spent any amount of time messing about with really complex and expensive camera setups and stuff like that, and often I find that recording stuff on my smartphone actually produces a better result, because I don't know very much about cameras. I'm not very good at cameras, so I'm more likely to basically just make a giant mess of a really expensive camera with lots of buttons and settings and stuff like that than I am with, you know, my smartphone, which can produce a really good result as well. In terms of archaeology kind of specifically and Egyptology, I think it's really important to look around and see what is available out there. You don't need to kind of create everything from scratch. 2 things that I found incredibly useful in recent months is virtual object handlings using Sketchfab models. And one example in particular is a couple of months ago, I was doing a seminar on the Rosetta Stone, and I realized that I've never been that close to the Rosetta Stone, because if you actually try to go close to the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum when it's full of people, it's basically impossible. So together with the class, we managed to kind of focus on some slightly unusual aspects of the stone, not just the inscription, but also the fact that it's got painted sentences on the side of the stone, basically commemorating its capture by the British Army and its donation to the British Museum, which are pretty difficult to see. I've never actually seen them when I've been and looked at the actual stone. But it was a really good springboard for talking about kind of colonialism and the role of colonialism in collecting. Increasingly, websites like Describing Egypt, but also the Egyptian Tourist Ministry and lots of other heritage organizations throughout the world are putting up virtual tours. This is a mastaba of tea in Saqqara, and it's really, really useful. Actually, the first time I used it was not even in an online class, it was in a face-to-face class, because I realized that I would need something like 100 slides and 100 pictures in order to show the same level of detail that I could give to the students, basically by just taking them through this virtual tour on a big screen. Hopefully, when we come back at some point, we can start using things like Google Cardboard as well to kind of really give the students an immersive experience of how these structures look. But it's something that's obviously very scalable to other archaeological sites, and it's also not too expensive if you have access to a 360-degree camera. Lastly, I just wanted to sort of briefly mention that it doesn't have to be all bad. I think we all felt a little bit, certainly everyone I've spoken to felt quite disheartened when they realized everything had to go online, especially if they hadn't taught online before. And there was perhaps a tendency to be quite gloomy about it. I was quite negative as well about my face-to-face course going online, and even though I actually teach most of my stuff online, and was a little bit depressed. And then I realized that it can be an opportunity in certain ways. So for instance, as part of my course, we used to have a seminar on ancient Egyptian food. We still do, but now I can augment the kind of seminar preparation material so that apart from just an article, there's also a video of me making an ancient Egyptian bread and ancient Egyptian stew. Normally, I wouldn't take a gas burner and lamb meat into the classroom. So it's something that kind of, that the lockdown and the kind of experience of being confined away from the university made me think in a different way. And I kind of realized, well, why don't I just show them instead of telling them? So I think that can be quite useful as well with anything to do with archaeological experimentation and stuff like that. So here at the end, very, very quickly, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, we've been working in Manchester a lot on using distance learning as a springboard for basically incorporating future technologies into teaching, in particular augmented reality. Augmented reality, it really all started with this statue here, which is a statue of an admiral called Sept from the late period in the Manchester Museum. And the fact that Sept is really in an absolutely terrible state of preservation. He hasn't survived particularly well. So we started a collaboration with a digital artist in Germany, who's also a very good Egyptologist, to try to essentially recreate this statue as it would have looked using other contemporary statues as parallels, and hopefully being able to incorporate it into a kind of augmented reality hieroglyph delivery session, where the students would have headsets and would be able to basically see the statue in front of them, walk around and translate the title around it. So I'm just going to very briefly show you a video of how the process looked. So this is not actually the statue itself. This is a model, a photogrammetry model that was taken by our German partner. And yeah, as you can see, Sept hasn't, he hasn't survived particularly well. But luckily the statue type is very, very common in the late period. So there's lots of interesting points of reference and points of parallel, which the artist could then use to basically create the most likely appearance of the statue in full. Now, I don't even pretend to understand this process because I don't, but it's a fairly lengthy process, but it produces a result that is really, really quite astounding. Obviously, this is the statue of Sekhmet in the front. What turned out to be quite interesting when I spoke to our partner afterwards was that he pointed out how similar to the original sculpting his process actually was. He felt almost like an ancient Egyptian sculptor. So simply in recreating it, he almost felt like he was doing a sort of a heritage study of the process in itself. The hieroglyphs, of course, the upper half are left blank, because we can construct the text to a certain point, but then from that point on it becomes too much guesswork, and the upper portion has basically just been left blank. The final stage was to basically add the existing texture onto the reconstructed components, so that you end up with, well, essentially some tech reborn to a certain extent. And completed and back again with his head and his torso in place. And hopefully when all of this is over and we can start getting back to work, we can start using some tech as a way to teach our students hieroglyphs. So that was pretty much all for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and cut off my microphone. Has my screen stopped showing, Hannah?
Yes, it has. Thanks very much, Nicky. That was really fascinating. So a few people joined us whilst Nicky was talking. Just to let you know, if you've just joined, that what we're going to do is to hear from the speakers first, and then we'll have a question and answer session with them. And if you have just joined, just to let you know that this part of the session is being recorded, and when we go into breakout groups, we'll stop recording, and everything else from that point is unrecorded. But if you have a problem with being recorded, then do just message Karina or I and let us know. Oh, I forgot my camera was off. So there we go. Karina, shall I hand over to you to introduce Suzanne?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for that really interesting discussion of your work, Nicky and Joyce. And you've exceeded our brief where we've said that we're making it low preparation and no slides are necessary. So thank you for providing some visuals too. But just to say that part of the idea behind this is that we don't add to our existing work pressures, and we use what we've already got to share, rather than having to spend lots of time in our prep work. Anyway, getting back to topic. Sorry, you can tell I'm feeling guilty about the teaching prep I haven't done for my own teaching. So our next speaker is Suzanne Lye, who I had the pleasure of meeting at a workshop, I think it was last year, at Binmar on crossing over. Was it the year before? I can't remember. Suzanne is Assistant Professor of Classics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and is going to talk to her about some of her experiences of engaging students online. And then we'll take some questions afterwards. Thanks, Suzanne, over to you.
Hi, yeah, I think it was maybe the year before last, before the endless march of March, right? Haven't you heard that expression, 23rd week of March, right now?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for having me. Happy to be here to share some of my experiences. So first of all, I'll just tell you the class that I'm teaching so you know what the frame is. So I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a philologist, but I do love and respect the objects because I do think that, you know, they help me better understand the text. So that's my orientation into this. And the class that I'm teaching right now, it's called Ancient Magic and Religion, and it's a maker class. So it's a combination of texts and objects that are related to ancient Mediterranean religious and magical practices. And so there's a makerspace component where I have students make replicas of magical or religious objects or structures. And then also there's a museum component. So I use the museum that's the Ackland Art Museum, which is our local museum. And they usually, in regular times, they do a gallery for us that's curated, like for a teaching bay. And the students would have a chance to go there and spend time with objects and see how they're laid out and actually get a sense for them in physical space, and then also study them from the text that we're reading. So that's the frame of my class. I'd like to amplify a few of the things that Nicky said that I think are really important about teaching in the remote and online medium, which is that you really have to use the benefits of the medium and not think of it as something lesser. It's just something different, and the students are learning different things. So they're different, you know, benefits, like being able to cook in front of your class. Simple is almost always best. And so I actually didn't have slides prepared, but then Nicky had such great things, so I threw up a few things that I will share now. So just a couple of slides. So So just to keep track, so this is me. These are some of the materials that I look at in my class. Oops. Let's see. And so here's something that I wanted to give you a sense of. So I do this because it's a class on magic and religion, but actually I do this, something like this in all my classes. When you're in the remote medium, people are used to just sitting at their desk for a long time. And so I always start my class with a 10 breath ritual. And this, what I do is I get people to stand up and take 10 breaths together. So it's a little meditative. And I actually have the sequence that I do where I say on the first breath, think about where you just were before this class. On the third breath, think about where you need to be after this class. And on the fifth breath, I want you to think about this class and where you are right now. And it's sort of a way of bringing people into the present. And then I tell them on the 10th breath, you know, check in with yourself for those 5 breaths. And on the 10th breath, open your eyes and then sit down. And when they sit down, then I know it's time to start class. And it just changes. I did this live and, you know, it just changed the energy in the classroom. And I noticed that it also works in the online remote medium as well. So people actually get up from their desk probably for the first time in hours and do this, and then they're kind of ready to go. So this is one thing I recommend. And then, sorry, that's the wrong title for the slide because I just threw this together. So anyway, so the first thing I want to say when you're doing an online course is create a Zoom community. And now I'm going to just throw up a few things and I'll show you how I do some of these things. The next thing is creating a space, an object orientation with the students, and using your students to be your partners when you are like learning new technology, because often, you know, there are all these digital possibilities, and we have to remember our students are the digital natives. They're much better and faster at this than we are. And so making them partners in that process, like I always have a resource discussion board or where they can throw up things like tips or other resources for the class. So make them part of the creation of the class as you go. And then I always pair my live sessions or my asynchronous or even recordings with discussion board for discussion, where I have some boards that they are talking to each other, and then other boards where I will respond. So I have at the beginning of each week what are called curiosity questions, where people enter what it is that was confusing, delightful, or important that they found, or just any questions they have. And then at the end of the week, they do takeaway questions where they talk about, so I'll show those if those come up. Let's see. So at the end of class, I have a board that is, they have to answer these 3 questions so I know where they're at. So these are just a few of the things that I use. And I wanted to actually just give you a quick look at what my website looks like to set up for them. And my students have liked it so far. So that's why I wanted to give you a look at it. Let's see if I can get there. So this is what my online website looks like. So I do have a syllabus with all the readings, but I noticed that, as Nikki said, you can't just put up a PDF and have students, you know, just expect them to read it. So, you know, creating things, this is a template that my university provided, but just the different font sizes to like cue students into things. And so I have, you know, highlights, here's what to expect, kind of like learning objectives, what's expected for this week. And I just wanted to scroll down to show you how I organize my days. So I give them an agenda of what to expect for the day. So today I'm gonna talk about the Roman context. And then on Friday, we're going to do breakout rooms about the readings, and I pre-assign readings to groups so that they can come prepared, even though everybody should have read everything. And they put things up on forums and things like that. So, and then at the end, I put next steps. And these are just all, and the assignments due next week. These are just all from my syllabus, but somehow putting these up just makes the students feel like like the class is a little bit more organized. So this is the visual, you know, way of connecting with your students, and then they can ask you questions based on this, and they have all the links that they need in one place. So for the next part of my presentation, I would like, if you can turn on your cameras, and I wanted to run you through a couple of activities and like that I use for my class. just to show you some Zoom aspects that you may or may not be aware of. So in the right-hand corner of your screen, there's those 3 dots in the top right. You see those? So if you click on that, one of the things I tell people, so accessibility and privacy are 2 things that are real concerning with remote learning when people are at their homes. And so I give them protocols in the first class, like say, okay, so if you have a roommate, you know, if you're in your bedroom, like your dorm room, and you have a roommate or, you know, somebody behind you, you can turn off your camera unless you're doing active conversation, right? So you don't have to have us looking into your bedroom the whole time, but I make them put up their profile picture so that we can still see their face. So one of the assignments in week 1 was to put up their profile picture because we were trying to get to know them. The other thing is a lot of people don't like to see their own face. So if you look at go under the 3 dots, you can hide self-view. So I run people through this. I'm like, okay, now go hide self-view. And then you don't have to see yourself. You just see everybody else. So it's a little bit more like being in class because you're not looking at yourself all the time when you're in class. And a lot of students feel more comfortable not seeing themselves. So there's when to do camera on and when to do camera off is very important. And also this aspect of hide self-view so that you can just be yourself without being self-conscious. The other thing I use a lot is the rename feature. And so, for example, I will, you know, tell people, okay, you know, just to practice this rename feature, I want everybody to rename themselves with their name and then their, you know, their favorite hero from the Iliad, which we just read, or the, you know, their favorite god from the Theogony, which is another thing we just read. So I will have them do something like that where they'll rename themselves. And if you look at my name, it's changed, right? And so in parentheses, I show them what I mean. And we do this as a game. And it's kind of a fun thing. So I might have them doing this while I set up their breakout rooms. So that's like an you know how it's hard, like you can do, if you do automatic breakout rooms, it's easy, but if you want specific people in the breakout room, it's kind of hard. So what I do for that, when I pre-assign the groups, I have them rename themselves and put the number of their group in front of their name. And, you know, so like that. And so when it shows up in the participant list, all the 1s are together, all the 2s are together. So it's really easy to assign breakout rooms quickly. And what I did last time, after, so I do these check-ins at the beginning of class where we just do popcorn check-in. Like I'll say, hey, Nikki, how you doing today? And Nikki might say, oh, you know, I'm really tired, but I'm getting on top of my work. And then you'd say, Karina, how are you doing? So they popcorn it. And so I tell them to do the number of their assigned group so that I know that. And I say, okay, everybody, I want you to popcorn, you know, 1 word that describes your state of mind right now. And while they're doing that, and I'm kind of listening, then I'm sorting them into their breakout rooms, but I don't open them until I'm ready. So those are just some little Zoom tricks. Another one that I learned for this anti-racism training that I did. So if you're having sensitive discussions in your class and you want people to participate in the chat and give an answer, but they may feel self-conscious, everybody can name themselves X, like that. And so if I, you know, say something if everybody does that and then types something in the chat, then it shows up as X, right, in the chat. And so you can see people's responses without seeing their names. So if it's a question that people might be self-conscious about. So, and something I do as well is, so if everybody, like if you'll indulge me, you know, those who want to just rename yourself X, and I want you to write, you know, your favorite archaeological site, but don't hit enter yet. So this is a thing. So everybody just type it in. You ready? Your favorite archaeological site. Okay. Okay, everybody done it? So everybody get your finger on enter. Now go. Everybody hit enter. Isn't that fun? And then I say, because I can't read and teach at the same time, I'm like, all right, guys, let's go through this list. Everybody look at the chat now. And we're going to go through this list and see like everybody's different. Okay. Oh, somebody can't decide. And then, so people can write something anonymously without you knowing. And then the second question you can ask is, all right, you know, there are all these topics. So, so now everybody enter the topic they want to talk about, right? And it doesn't need to be the one that you brought up, right? The ones you want to, the one that you want to talk about. And then I have them answer that question again, and then it comes up, and then I see which ones come up, and sometimes there's some overlap, you know. So that's like a quick trick if you want to ask like just a general big question. So I'll have everybody name themselves back to themselves so that we can see. But that's just a trick that I, you know, do. So everybody rename yourself so that we all know who you are for later. And so I also, so these are just little Zoom community tricks that I do as just the nuts and bolts of like the management, because it's really stressful not to have somebody managing the chat and, you know, trying to organize and not organize. It's hard to do everything at once when you're doing remote teaching. So I'm trying to say. So besides those accessibility protocols, using the chat, and I claim that space for us, like during check-ins, students like to chat with each other. And then I'm like, all right, it's class time. I'm going to hit record. And now this is part of our instructional space. So no, like, you know, no chit chatting. Of course, they might be private chatting. I don't know, but that's, you know, at least the space is going to be for our, like if somebody has a question, I'll take a moment and say, okay, if you have a question along the way, put it in the chat, and I will take a moment to address questions in the chat after I give this portion of my lecture. So that's what I do. And then, you know, in terms of the archaeology stuff, the object stuff, which we can't do on campus right now, the things that I have done with our makerspaces, they have made a bunch of, I've had them print up a bunch of small amulets, like different, that students who are nearby can pick up, and the other ones we're going to ship to them. So I don't know if that's possible for people to do if you have access to 3D printing. The other option, if that doesn't work, is you can have people make things like simple origami type things, or just things like, you know, Elmer's glue and paper and markers, and make something that's 3-dimensional. And then I'm having them do object work with that, because one of the things I really want students to do in my class when we were live is get a sense for space and object, like relationships between animate and inanimate things, and, you know, and how they and how those develop, and how a space will determine how you move through it. And so in a museum, when we went there, I would often say, okay, which direction do you go? What's the museum telling you? What's the space telling you to do? And so I have them do that sort of walkthrough in their home or in their space, wherever they are, or in a garden if they're nearby, like a park or something. I'm like, okay, what is the orientation? Where are the labels? Where are the things where do you expect things to be, and why? And so I give them an activity like that. So I think that that's the object and space part that is more the archaeological part that might be helpful. But just, you know, we're in this virtual environment, but I also want them to remember they're in a 3-dimensional space, and just keep reminding them in different ways. And the other thing that the last thing I want to share is, there are a lot of virtual tours, as Nicky was talking about, in museums. I've been using Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Origin a lot recently to give virtual tours of, you know, I assign different tours. And so if students can't get access to the games themselves, which I will tell you that Ubisoft is really generous, the company that makes those games, they're very generous with giving out keys for anybody who has a PC that's capable of doing that. But then I also have links to these YouTube videos, which are the tours. So I've assigned some of these tours, which are just the videos of the tours, to students along the way as an introduction. So that's pretty much it for me. I have lots of little tips and tricks like this, so that I've developed over the last few weeks of teaching and from before. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was great. Oh, we will do our virtual clapping. So I've asked if anyone has any questions. You can either raise your hand via Zoom or type them here, and we've got one immediately from Kate Clark, which is, are there any tips on managing workshops online, especially where you really rely on saying something and then capturing what they say? So whereas would usually use a flip chart.
Well, do you mean where you need to actually write things down?
Yeah, Kate, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I was just pressing. Yeah, so quite often when I'm teaching, I do it as a kind of workshop where you get people to say a thing and then you show that you've heard what they say by writing it down, and then you give them the picture. And I'm used to doing that with a flip chart. I've never done it online, and I don't know how I'd go about doing that.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if you have some suggestions, Suzanne. I mean, we've been experimenting a little bit with using Zoom on an iPad with an Apple Pencil, basically, so you can actually you can share your screen, and it's like a whiteboard essentially. You can write it down. So that could be one way to kind of emulate the kind of whiteboard or flip chart kind of vibe online. That could be possible.
I will say, some of my colleagues here use the whiteboard feature on Zoom, or just actually not even the whiteboard, they just use Word, and like they'll type stuff in. It's harder in language class is hard, I find, to type fast with accenting and, you know, finding the letters and things like that. One thing I have had my students do recently is I have students taking notes in class. Like, so everybody has to give an executive summary, what I call it, what's in the term, which is a one-page summary of a lecture. And so everybody gets practice with that. So they're all, you know, everybody's taking notes, but one person is responsible for the notes for a day. And so like if I have a word I need to share, I just put it in the chat. Like, so sometimes I'll share a Greek word or a Latin word or a term and just put it in the chat. And yeah, so it's not quite the same. But
this is more that when you sort of get a collective story, and then you sort of take them through a process using what they've just said. So it's that I'll try the whiteboard function though.
But you could also do it with a camera if you have an easel.
Camera and a whiteboard.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when you do it. Like you do that, and you're like, hey, you know. I mean, my students, I mean, you can really be a little bit more loose and jokey. Like after my students come back from the breakout room last time, like they were just kind of glum because we were on campus and we're off campus now. And so I've been doing these funny things. So they went into a breakout room. When they came back, I was wearing a purple wig. And they just like cracked up because I was like, well, you guys were in the breakout room. I changed outfits, you know? And so, or I brought like, you know, an object to sit on my desk so that it was just a different visual when they came back.
I think that's right. Using humor is a really good way to kind of get over some of the potential issues. We usually we did last year at least a bloopers reel of the lecture recordings, because we teach asynchronously, complete with a Benny Hill theme, and the students absolutely loved it, because there's just lots of clips of us essentially there's a lot of bleeping because a lot of it is basically just us swearing at equipment, but the students really liked it.
I think just going back to the whiteboard question, there's a couple of people have put in the chat. Cara has suggested Miro, a digital flip chart, and Shireen uses screen sharing with a blank Word document or something like that, is one way of doing it. Another, just sort of along the camera theme, if you had the money, you can get desktop visualizers. They're pretty cheap. Well, I mean, they're about, I know that.
What is a desktop visualizer?
So, you know, visualizers, but I've not got it plugged in here, but they're effective, you know, like if you had a visualizer in a lecture theatre where if you wanted to show, like in the old days when you wanted to show an OHP or you want to show an artifact or something, and you can use the visualizer to effectively, it's a camera that's above an object or a document, and then it projects it onto the screen. So it's just like an old-fashioned OHP, but called a visual because it's digital, I think. And you can buy USB visualizers, and effectively it's just that, a camera that then you can project onto the screen, and you can share that. So you could put a notepad under the visualizer and write with it. I know in terms of languages teaching that I have colleagues who are going to use that to teach sort of different scripts. So it might be something that might also be useful for teaching.
Yeah, or one question here is, do we have any tips for integrating collaborative activities on web-based programs?
What do you mean by collaborative activities?
Gwendolyn, are you there to elaborate?
Yes, sorry. Because I'm trying to develop an activity for a course where I want students to go into small groups and create concept maps together. And the way that I'm approaching this at the moment is that they either work together on a draw.chat whiteboard where they can all edit it at the same time, or use something like a PowerPoint slide or draw.io that one scribe makes the notations on and they all contribute to. But this is kind of the first time that I'm doing something like this, and I have no idea if that's particularly actionable, or if I should be approaching this in a different way.
I think, I don't know, like my students do a lot of small group work, and they end up, and they're in assigned groups, as well as me doing random groups sometimes in class to make sure they're intermingling. And I think all those suggestions are great. I suggest them, but I let them decide which one they want to use. I would note, like here anyway, most students were used to using the Google platform from their high schools or whatever, so they'll often choose to collaborate on a Google Doc as their preferred, or Google presentation. So I just let them decide, but they seem much more adept at it than I am.
Thank you.
And I think we'll just have one final question before we go into our breakout rooms, which was a question from Steve, which is how we deal with differential access to online teaching. Steve, do you want to ask? Where are you? I can't see you on my screen.
Oh, you're muted at the moment, Steve. You just need to unmute.
Put my video on, not the muting bit. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add other than a bit of experience of students, some of whom can engage like we are now, and others of whom can only do that by speaking, and others who can only do that by typing. And these are I found very difficult to cope with. They're just very different forms of engagement, and I feel very sorry for those at one end of the spectrum compared to those like ourselves who can actually plug in directly. And on the different degrees of engagement, I mean, and I suppose we've all experienced this in face-to-face teaching as much as online teaching, that you have people who are quite used to just talking, and then others who sit back. And I think you can kind of notice that in a physical environment, but in an online one, it's quite difficult to keep track of, I find anyway. So I just wondered if there was how much we need to worry. Well, obviously we need to worry if people aren't engaging, but what we can do about that, any tips that you have? Thank you.
That's really important. I think it's one of the reasons why we moved to do a lot of stuff asynchronously in combination with written discussion boards, because the issue that we had was initially when we tried to do synchronous teaching across multiple time zones, that didn't work very well, because essentially what we had to do was do the live recording at a sort of reasonable time for whatever time zone we were in, and then upload a recording. And it turned out the students who were in, say, Australia or California, who couldn't access the live recording, became really quite angry about this, and there was a sort of feeling that they were getting a sort of second tier education. So in that sense, I think the really important thing is actually to realize that it's happening. I think that's the kind of the first step, is to realize that that the students have differential access to equipment. And not just that, but they have differential access to even something like actual internet access. When the University of Manchester did sort of immediately went after lockdown to doing everything online, there were just any amount of problems with students not being able to get into Blackboard because the server crashed and they didn't have proper access, all that kind of stuff. So I think the key is to do, again, a combination of activities, some which are written like discussion boards, some that kind of speak to people who are more outspoken and more comfortable being on camera. So I think it's just a matter of kind of balancing, so there's something for everyone.
Yeah, I have some I can't cure that. I mean, if people aren't engaged, they're unengaged, but I definitely take the idea that, hey, I don't say that this is a worse medium. I keep telling them, hey, look at what we can do. Look at these cool things we can do. And I have some of the things that I like to encourage them is, participate as they feel best, but I count everything. So for me, everything counts. I'm like, how you show up counts. Are you paying attention? Do I see you texting? Are you, I mean, this is live as well. It's like, it's not just the exam that counts. I'm looking for engagement overall. So some students might have a week or two where it's like chaos. Like I actually have some students who have COVID. They're not feeling that great. They have symptoms and they're symptomatic. And so I'm like, look, take a break. You can circle back, even though I have deadlines for posts and things. I'm like, circle back and fill in, respond to others. This is how you can participate. Even if you haven't done the reading, respond to what other people are saying. And so I give them an expansive view of participation instead of a specific one. And then I tell them that they should, they can participate as they see fit that's comfortable. They should at least do one thing that's really comfortable each week and one thing that feels like a little bit of a stretch. If they're not used to being the first poster or the first person to raise their hand when I ask a question, just try it. And then, we'll forget it next time that you were doing that, but it's just like, keep working on that, your stretch zone. And then the other thing I do just to force the issue, I guess, is, the popcorn check-ins. I just want people to get in the habit of speaking and getting used to hearing their own voice. And so everybody has to say something, even if it's just a few words, and they know it every time. So it kind of normalizes them speaking in this medium. And I allow people, and I kind of make it a joke. It's like, oh, somebody can't, we can't see somebody's video's off. Oh, their audio isn't working. Okay. All right, let's everybody look at the chat real quick. And we're waiting with bated breath while you type in your response. Or if they're going in and out, I'm like, oh, I guess we can't hear you. We're gonna just move on, but I want you to, come back to us when you can, go in the chat. Don't worry, we'll circle back to you next time if we can't quite get to you this time. But just, reduce anxiety, because I think people feel a lot of anxiety around technology. And then also doing the small group breakouts, students are much more comfortable speaking with a couple other students when I'm not in the room. And so letting them do that. And sometimes I pop in the breakout rooms and sometimes I don't. I just give them a time. I'm going to pull you back at, 10:57. And then, that's just, and then I notice everybody's a little bit more relaxed after a breakout room. It's like they've just been able to chill with each other. So, those are more the forced conversation that I make them have. And then I, just challenge them and try to empower them to participate. But, not everybody wants to, so that's okay too. And I say, that's okay. This may not be where you're going to put all your time and energy in my class, but I at least want you to get through it. So let's figure that out.
I think you're talking about breakout rooms is a brilliant segue into a bit of a breakout room session. Have you just put it in the chat, Karina?
I have, yes.
I also had it prepped to in the chat. That's brilliant. So what we'd like you to do is we're going to put you in breakout rooms, and what we'd like you to do is discuss challenges that you see to engaging students online. What you can feel free to discuss what's specific to archaeology, anything more generic, and then have a think about what solutions you've come up with to address those kind of challenges, and then and we're going to give you till 10 past 5, I nearly said no, till 10 past the hour wherever you are in the world, so 15 minutes to discuss in your breakout groups. And what we'd then like you to do is feedback what your group decided was the biggest challenge to online learning, and your group's top 3 tips for engaging students online. I know a few people have had to go, including Nikki has to go at 4 as well. So I'm sorry that we've lost a few people, but and I made the breakout groups before we've lost people. So hopefully it won't be too uneven. But we'll see you at 10 past. So let me.
Specific to archaeology, actually. But in terms of 3 sort of tips, I suppose, and solutions we talked about. One, Penny actually said that in seminars she finds it really useful to sort of start a conversation about something else, get everyone used to chatting, kind of, you know, getting engaged about just, you know, non-seminar topics, and then just segue straight into the seminar, and most of the time they don't notice and they're still talking. So that was one tip. Secondly, we were discussing a lot, Suzanne made a good point about, you know, or what I was picking up from her presentation was that putting in kind of the rules of play and expectations quite early on. So we're going to do this, we're going to do that, I expect you to do this. This is, you know, you're going to have to listen to me for 10 minutes talking at you now, but it's recorded, you can watch it later, but I will be expecting feedback in the chat. So just kind of, you know, managing expectations and putting down rules of play early on. And then third one, well, it was the strategy for getting a person in the breakout room to report back. This is how I ended up doing it. And so for this particular one, it was whose birthday is next. So mine's 13th of October, and the others were February and July. So here I am reporting back. But, you know, Suzanne said, you know, other thing, who woke up latest before attending the class? I'm sure they'll have a good fight about that. So yeah, strategies for getting people to report back, I thought was a really useful one to stop all the awkward pauses.
That's excellent. Excellent. That's really helpful. Thank you. Let's go through the different groups, shall we, with the challenge and tips, and then we can have a bit wider discussion. So who was in the first group, group one? I think that was the group that James was in. Yes. Who's reporting back from your group that James was in?
One of the guys.
Were you in that too, Brent, as well? Claire's nominated one of the guys. Go on.
All right. Yeah, so we, I mean, I talked about a couple of problems. Well, probably one of the most interesting things that, at least sorry, still drinking coffee. The problems were like actually trying to figure out how to get people to handle the artifacts, to really like get a sense of touch. Especially with lab classes, it is really hard to get students involved in any particular way. We talked about a couple of possible solutions to that, like actually like holding things around, like doing videos where you can actually show people holding, manipulating, and teaching all of the, like how to handle things, especially if you do get some limited lab experience. The other things that were discussed were a couple of good platforms that were based on gaming, like Discord, which I know a lot of people end up using for gaming, but then some other associations end up using it as well, where you don't have to log in like 4 or 5 times and click through a bunch of things. It's just easy to get right into the discussion. And Sporkle, which is a program where students can actually write their own quizzes as a way to kind of flip the teaching.
What was that called? Sorry, Brent, I didn't hear.
Sporkle, S-P-O-R-C-L-E, and Discord, D-I-S-C-H-O-R-D. I think there's an H in there.
Cool. Are they also like Kahoot and things like that as well, where you can make quizzes and things?
I think Sporkle is like that. I personally have only heard about Sporkle from pub quizzes. Like some people use those.
Yeah, I discovered Sporkle when I was trying not to finish my PhD, and it's just a generic sort of quiz thing where you know, like I used to test myself. Could I name every country in Africa, or that kind of, these kind of things? But anyone can make a quiz, and then the idea is you can rank it. But you can, from what I understand, you can make profiles, set up quizzes so that they're private between certain groups. So you have the ability to do that, and it's just a platform that I suppose it's just easier than sort of doing it via a Word document or something. You know, it just sort of lends itself. I don't know about Kahoot, I'm afraid.
Yeah, just looking at it, it looks quite similar. It actually looks a bit more user-friendly than Kahoot. Although Kahoot's something that I know that, you know, my kids use Kahoot. So I think it's, so maybe me saying it doesn't, Sporkle looks more user-friendly is perhaps just my, reveals my inadequacies with it. But yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so that's group one. Group three, Karina, were you group two?
It was group two, and I tried to shirk the duty of reporting back, but I failed. So our main challenges were around the importance of materiality, especially with school children, and about technology accessibility, doing a lot of sessions online, and our top tips. Using what's already available. So a lot of museums already have some great resources, so just kind of don't be afraid of using what's already there. Our second one was just about the value of adapting what you have for digital inclusion, which I'm not sure is actually a tip now, but I've come to look back on my notes. And our third one is about using something like Google Docs or Google Classroom or a shared document to share links and resources so that people can contribute to that as you go along. Have I summed that up okay? If anyone from my group wants to chime in, please do.
That's fine, Karina.
Cool. And then finally, my group, in the minute in which I disappeared at the end, did anyone agree to speak? And if not, does anyone want to summarise the discussion?
Oh, we saw you making notes, Hannah, so we cheated and assumed that you will be doing it.
I am. Well, I don't. I am quite happy to. They might not sum it all up. I think the main problem, a major problem that we discussed, was that students are often expected to move between multiple different platforms. So, you know, like the virtual learning environment, and then Zoom or Teams or something else for synchronous engagement. And then, you know, we've just said Sporkle and Kahoot, and, you know, there's all sorts of other wonderful things out there, and that we might make the assumption that students might be, for want of a better word, digital natives, but that potentially they're just as confused as us. And I think, was it you, Doris, that said and I think this, now we're going into tips, that you started your class by sort of saying, look, I'm the same as you, I'm getting to grips with this too, and sort of just starting off in that way, and letting people know that you're all learning together, that it's a learning journey for everyone, was one of the kind of, and also a brilliant tip, which was the idea of just giving students time to experiment with different platforms. Just in the first week, giving them half an hour to experiment with everything, so that they feel more confident when they come to it. And also having guidance for staff as to how to deal with students who can't get on the internet, or who kind of struggle with synchronous content, either adjusting it to have asynchronous content, or having guidance about how you can support students who can't get on the internet. I think those probably are top tips. Does that sound all right, team?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that something I've found quite useful to square this circle of differential access is to have something like a Google Doc associated with a seminar that anyone can type into. And then if you reach the stage where there's this general feedback like we're having now, and there's a group who don't want to speak, then you can read out what they typed into a document on their behalf and kind of allow their contribution to come through. So I think that's a good way of reconciling this problem of different degrees of confidence or just practical access to online teaching. Thanks.
I really like some of the comments we got, that it's kind of essentially these are some of the same strategies we use when we're in the classroom. and actually not thinking about the digital environment as being that much different.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about as well in our group was that being, and this is something that I find that I'm talking about at work all the time, is about being driven by the learning outcomes rather than being driven by the amazing whizzy technology that's to hand, and using what's appropriate to ensure that students are actually learning what they need to, rather than feeling that you have to sort of sign up to everything. Although I do quite like all the whizzy stuff. I'm sorry, and I'm reading the comments at the same time. Yeah.
If anyone wants to say anything, just unmute.
The other thing, you know, because it's hard to, as you're noticing, to present and read the chat, you can always like, and if you don't have a TA, which I don't usually have a TA, you can sort of assign a student to kind of keep track of the chat and to come back to you with, you know, because they sometimes think like the top things people, and they'll rephrase it in their own words, and so it's kind of like they're also learning something. It's, you know, even if they're not quite paying attention to the discussion, at least, like some students text in class and, you know, on their phones, and I can see them. I don't know why they think I can't, but give them the distraction that they need. Like give them something to, because if they need to be doing things and texting or whatever, then, you know, that can be their assignment for them in a class.
Kate?
Yeah. That's great.
Really, can I just go back to absolute square one and ask a really basic question? Because I haven't done this before. I've got to do a conference presentation in a couple of weeks with a sort of PowerPoint, and I don't even know how to record that. And even silly things like, do I put my face on the screen in the PowerPoint? I mean, I know that you guys must do it all the time. What are your top tips for actually putting a lecture into the can?
Or I tell you my top tip, Microsoft have got great, their Word, Office, whatever they're called, those people that own PowerPoint, they've got good guides on it. So if in PowerPoint at the top, there's like the help bar, if you put something like record audio or recording the slideshow or whatever, something like that in the help bar, there's a step-by-step guide that they have that I've used for colleagues, and the only reason why I'm pointing you to that is because it depends on the version of PowerPoint that you have as to the type of recording that you've got. So if you've got Office 365, you can record it with a little video of yourself, and it's all quite straightforward. And if you've got earlier version,
I did read the guide and I couldn't find where to put your picture in.
Yeah, it's different versions have different stuff. Anyway, that's why I'll stop butting in.
Well, one thing that I found that's really helpful for recording lectures is, well, my university at least has a subscription to TechSmith Relay, and I don't know how expensive or cheap it is, but the best thing about it is that there's a button you can press and it'll automatically do closed captioning. And then you can just wander through and click each one to make sure that it didn't mess up. And it's actually, I think, developed for academics. So it's got a lot of like Greek and Latin and really weird things that it just automatically recognizes. And so closed captioning only takes about 5 minutes for like a 20-minute lecture.
A dumb question again, I'm sorry, this is 101. Do you guys then edit them afterwards?
You go through and look at it. Basically, you can just press the right arrow and it'll just go from 1 to 1, like each of the different things. And then you can just click on it and make any edits you want.
How does it deal with technical language?
It does really, really well. It has, I mean, I'm really strangely, I'm not teaching any archaeology this semester, teaching linguistic and forensic anthropology. It thinks that I'm talking about not forensic, but like forensic, like crazy, and apologists is how it tends to do forensic anthropologists. So like little things like that are idiosyncratic, but like trochanter
is wonderful.
Yeah.
I was saying archaeological theories, and it kept saying archaeological fairies. It's a whole lecture about archaeological fairies. It's magical.
I like that.
I wanted to say that, you know, the bloopers are fun, of course, but I'm finding out just how long it takes to actually edit those captions. I mean, in a 1 hour lecture, it's taking me perhaps as much as 30, 40 minutes to go through and take out all the mistakes of, you know, how they interpret. For instance, I said amphora, I can't remember what they called it, but it came out as something very different. So just a tip to factor in the extra amount of time it takes for editing. And it's great that what Brent was saying, that there may be software that, you know, removes the need to do quite so much of that, but we'll still have to look through them. Yeah, thank you.
Also, YouTube will offer you, if you were to upload it as a YouTube video, it will do captions and everything for you automatically. You can embed it. So if you've produced it on PowerPoint, you can then upload it privately and it will do it. And then you can share that link. That's what we did quite a lot of.
Okay, thank you.
And what about caption when the captions are wrong? I mean, that it uses the wrong word.
Yeah,
you have to correct
I mean, luckily we were quite simplified with ours.
it.
But yeah, no, that was, we only had that once. And it was quite amusing. But yeah.
I'm finding that YouTube is quite good at it's quite good at it wasn't YouTube that was saying I was talking about archaeological fairies. They heard theories, so that's good.
And I think I quite like the thought of ending our session on archaeological fairies. So Hannah has posted in the chat a link to a very, really brief feedback form, and also the links to our next sessions. So please do, to share, please do give us your thoughts and your comments. And just a big thank you. Sorry, Hannah.
Oh, sorry, Karina. I was just going to say, next time we're really going to pick up on some of the kind of things that we touched on here. Today we talked quite generally about the challenges of teaching online, but the fact that one of the groups, or two of the groups, are talking about the kind of teaching materiality, that's what we want to focus on more next time. So particularly teaching practice, teaching lab work, teaching field work. How do we do that online? So that's what will be the focus of the next session. Sorry, Karina. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's good. And we've got our next session starts an hour and a half later than this one. Yeah. So we're hoping that, works with different time zones or better. Yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in. See you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks for organising it. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks both for organising. Karina,
you want to stay on, Karina, at the end?
Okay.